There it is in the upper left-hand corner. So if you're just joining us, thank you for coming to Breakfast with the Birds virtual lecture. This is number 3 in a series of 4, and you'll see the flyer on your screen there. So we're hoping that you'll join us next month for our final installment in the series as well. So I think my housekeeping information is finished. Oh, one other part. If you would like to ask a question, you actually type it right into the chat box, which is where everyone is typing their location. Oh, we have an Audubon, Florida person coming in from the Panhandle of Florida. Welcome, Rebecca. That's really cool. So I think it is time to turn things over to our speaker. So Adam DiNuovo, he will begin in just a moment. What I'm going to do is actually spotlight his video. So give me just a second here. Okay, so on your screen, you should see just Adam and the flyer for Breakfast with the Birds. So Adam has been working with us at Rookery Bay through a partnership of Audubon, Florida. And at one time he had an office at our building, but like I said, everyone is working from home offices right now. So Adam, if you want to give a short overview of where you were before you came to Rookery Bay and also what you do for Audubon, Florida, I'm sure everyone would love to know who they're about to hear from. And then go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Right, sure. So yeah, I'm a shorebird and seabird biologist with Audubon, Florida. I also manage the local stewardship program, which has volunteers out on the beach. Prior to coming to Florida, I was in San Diego and I was a research coordinator for the Institute of Conservation Research, Western Snowy Plover and California Least-Tern Project, which is part of the San Diego Zoo. Prior to that, I was the research coordinator for Project Puffin in Maine, which is really a National Audubon Seabird Restoration Program. So I helped manage the research on 7 seabird islands in the Gulf of Maine, puffins, various species of alcids, terns, things like that. And now I'm in Florida, kind of working a lot less remotely than I used to. This is actually not as remote for me during the time of COVID. I'm used to sleeping on the ground or on rocks or on an island somewhere. So here I get to sleep in a bed and I have running water and all those fun things. So it's pretty good. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about beach nesting birds. The ones that I have in Florida, which we're going to highlight 3 species of beach nesting birds. And this is kind of the area of the world that is has been an obsession of mine since I was probably 5 years old. And I'm talking about just where the ocean meets the land, no matter where that is, and 100 feet in either direction, has fascinated me since as long as I can remember. I spent my summers on Cape Cod as a child and growing up, so I have this salty water in my blood, I think. I mean, there's no place in the world I'd rather be than right on the beach where the ocean meets the land. And then in my journey, I found these birds that nested there, and then that really fascinated me as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what these beach nesting birds are, what they do, some of the vulnerabilities that they have, and things like that, and a little bit about what you could do to help them towards the end of the presentation. So we'll talk a little bit about the traits of most beach nesting birds. They nest in a little small scrape in the sand. For a lot of them, it's just a little indentation in the sand. They lay their eggs right in that. A lot of them like fairly open beaches. Some like a little bit more vegetation than others, but fairly open, no real dense vegetation for most of them. The eggs and the chicks, as you can imagine, are very well camouflaged. I mean, that's the strategy to stay alive when you're a beach nesting bird. And they do different things to defend their chicks or nests. And the colonial nesters, a lot of times, like terns, use an active defense. So if a predator or any intruder is near the eggs or the chicks, the whole group will mob that predator or a person or whatever it may be to try to force them away. Shorebirds, you do a little bit different. They're very secretive. So they're relying on hiding. And then also, if you do get too close, they kind of lead you away from the nest by pretending that they're injured. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And they all, of course, as you can imagine, they require a nearby food source. So having high quality, readily available food is key to raising chicks on the beach. So here's just a little example of of what I'm talking about between colonial nesters and solitary nesters. The shorebirds are typically solitary nesters, things like plovers and oyster catchers, sanderlings, and seabirds, not true seabirds, but seabirds, gulls, terns, skimmers, birds that we see here nesting in Florida that nest in large groups. And they use that, that safety in numbers is the strategy that they use. And here's a little bit, I'm not going to read these to you, but this is kind of what I've been talking about. And this is a couple of the traits of these different groups of birds. And you can see there, this least tern in the bottom right picture, how that chick is so well camouflaged staying next to the adult. It just looks like the sand. So that really helps it. It helps it blend in and get away from predators. And it also is a hindrance to it when you're talking about people walking on the beach. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So here's just a shot of what some high quality beach nesting bird habitat looks like here where I work in Southwest Florida. You can see that front beach that's a little bit more open here. And then right here in the foreground where it's kind of much more open, that's typically where we'd see least terns nesting. And then that mid beach, a little bit of vegetation and sand. Black skimmers where I'm working tend to really like that sort of habitat. And then sort of in the back here where there's a little bit more vegetation, we get Wilson's plovers nesting. They like a little bit more vegetation than the colonial nesters because they're nesting alone. They don't need large areas of high quality habitat. They just need a spot to put their nest. So here I'll talk about these three birds in kind of in a chronological order from when they start to nest here in Southwest Florida. So the first bird I want to talk about, this is a solitary nesting bird. It's the Wilson's plover. It starts nesting about, towards the end of March and into April is when we get our first nest, and they can nest all the way really here through July. Typically not as late as July. If everything goes well for Wilson's plovers here, they all pretty much have their nests laid sometime by the end of May. And then they're hatching and raising chicks for the rest of the summer. The later and later that nesting happens, the less likely they are to fledge chicks, because it means they're on their second or third nesting attempt and everything just becomes harder later in the summer. So typically we're looking starting mid-March and usually finding nests around the 1st of April. So when we're out on the beach, what we're looking for and what you can look for when you're out there is these birds starting mid-March, really, even before we're expecting nests, the males and females will pair up. And you'll notice this, you can see here, the closer bird to the camera is a male Wilson's plover. And then in the back, you can see it's a female. And the male has that darker neck ring and the female is much more drab. She's gonna spend a lot of time on the nest during the day. And it makes sense for her to blend into the sand as much as she can. And this is a little mating ritual that they do. And if you were out on the beach in March and April, you could see this. The male does this it's really funny. He gets kind of up on his toes with a flat back and he kind of prances around, dancing around, trying to impress the female. And hopefully he does impress the female. I mean, it never seemed like a very masculine dance to me, but it seems to work for Wilson's plovers. So you could get out there, you can see this. And if you see this kind of behavior, it's really important. Well, I guess it's important all year long, but you really want to not disturb these birds as much as you can, as much as you can avoid it. It's probably starting in March and moving through the entire breeding season. Even this activity here, if you were to walk by these birds too close and it disrupts this, everything just gets delayed just a little bit. And those kinds of things can compound on each other and make it tougher for the bird to nest. So this is what they're doing in March and April. They're, prancing around the females. They're trying to, impress her, I guess you could say. And then if all goes well, and during this process, the male will be scraping. And that's what we call the little indentation in the sand that they'll lay eggs in. So that's what these pictures right here are of a Wilson's plover making a scrape. And then, they'll make several of them. And I suppose the female is checking them out the whole time and judging the work. So when she finds one that she likes and she likes the male, then they lay eggs. So this is a pretty classic setting for a Wilson's plover nest, a little bit of vegetation and 3 eggs. And they'll start incubating those eggs once the 3rd egg is laid. So they all sort of hatch synchronously. You don't want one hatching and then 5 days later another hatching. That wouldn't work well for the strategy that these birds use. And here, just to give you an idea, this is, you can see the egg underneath this female. the size of that egg. It's a pretty large egg for the size of the bird, as you can tell by this photo. And here is a bird. This is something getting too close to the nest or too close to chicks, like I was talking about. This is how they're protecting that nest. This female had probably come off a nest or something else was happening, and she's doing what we call feigning. So she's pretending she's injured to lead a predator away. That works. It works really well if it's an actual predator. If it's a person, they a lot of times don't know what this bird is doing. So this doesn't mean anything to most people, and they're just continue walking. So what you really want to pay attention for when you're on the beach, if you're watching Wilson's plovers or you're just walking, especially on Marco or any beach that has any sort of nesting shorebird, is this sort of behavior. If you see this behavior, you really need to stop. I would stop walking, look around, make sure you're really looking at the sand, and move, watching where you put every foot. There could be a chick or an egg on the beach that you just don't know about. And that's really when these birds run into trouble, is when people don't recognize these signs, and a bird could get stepped on, a nest could get stepped on. So it's really important to keep your eye on this sort of behavior when you're on the beach. This lets you know that you're where you're not supposed to be. And if you move away slowly and carefully, eventually this bird will stop this behavior because you're far enough away, you're no longer a threat. And then once that happens, you can continue on your beach walk.
Adam, we have a question in the chat box, also a comment. I just wanted to stop you for a second. Bren says that the least terns actually chased off the Wilson's plovers at Stump Pass. Is there anything you want to add about that?
Sure, yeah. So a lot of times when we see this on Marco, and they see it in a lot of places, these birds are nesting before least terns. So these Wilson's plovers will go and nest, and then the least terns will come and they'll nest and they'll have a colony. So a lot of the time, every time that Wilson's plover moves through maybe its own nesting territory, those Wilson's plovers don't want it there. I mean, those least terns don't want it there. Least terns, any terns, they don't like anything. I mean, they don't like each other. So they don't want anything around their nests and chicks. So when the Wilson's plover runs through, it'll chase it away. Or sometimes Wilson's plover chicks run into least tern colonies. And when that happens, the adults go with them. And then, chaos ensues because the terns don't want anybody near them. So they're attacking them the whole time to move them out. And that's part of the defense, like I was talking about, the least terns, how they mob things. And they'll mob a Wilson's plover as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about least terns. And here's just another shot of the Wilson's plover feigning. And you can imagine that this is a still shot, but this bird would be flapping that wings kind of half on its side, and it really does look like something's wrong with it. So it is an effective strategy. So after about 25 days of sitting on that nest, if all goes well, this is the next thing that happens. So, I mean, these chicks, this chick is probably 24 hours old, maybe 2 days, they're little tiny puffballs. They look like cotton balls with toothpick legs. And as soon as they dry, after they hatch, they dry in the nest cup, and then they're up and they're running around. I mean, this bird can run around. It's called precocial. So that bird, once it's up and moving, it feeds itself. This bird can sustain itself. The parents do not feed it. It does rely on the parents, though, for protection from predators, obviously. Also brings it to high quality food areas, and also to brood it. These birds cannot thermoregulate, so they can get too hot and they can also get too cold. And people in South Florida don't think a lot about cold. Definitely not in the last 6 weeks here. But these birds, even if it's really warm outside, if it rains and they're being disturbed and they get wet, they can become hypothermic and they can die. So even if it's 90 degrees and raining, a Wilson's plover chick is very vulnerable. So that's just another reason. This is going to be a common theme throughout this talk, I think, and you'll realize it by just learning about the life history of these birds, that they're tough as nails, but they're really vulnerable at certain times of the year. And you really, really have to respect these nesting areas, because even the little disturbance at the wrong time of day or during the wrong weather can be catastrophic for this chick, like a chick like this right here. And here's another one. This is kind of this is like, the next stage of this chick's life. This is, it's kind of awkward looking at this stage. It looks like to me, it looks like it has a super long neck. It's got really long legs. It's sort of awkward. I mean, still a cute bird, of course, but it's just this like weird, I don't want to call it a teenager, but maybe a toddler stage. Fast as lightning on the beach. They're really entertaining to watch. So at this stage, they're really moving a lot, where when they're, 1 or 2 days old, they're not they're not as active, but they start to get really active when they hit this size and moving forward. So this bird would be, you can see this on Marco, and probably not right now because a lot of the chicks are older or have fledged already, but in May, you go out there and you just find a Wilson's plover parent. If you sit down at a respectful distance, these chicks will come out and just start doing what they do. So they're running all around the beach. It's really funny to watch, and really amazing that something this small can survive somewhere where it's so harsh. On the 4th of July here last year, when I was on the beach, and this is just an example of why these things are so vulnerable and it's so critical not to disturb them. The sand temperatures at 10 o'clock in the morning were 158 degrees. So if these birds are disturbed or anything like that, or just surviving out here, it's really amazing that the sand probably, who knows how high it gets in the afternoon, over 160 degrees, and they're able to make a living out on that beach if we just give them a little bit of space. So it's really incredible that something that small and that fragile is also that tough, which is, one of the reasons why I like these birds so much. Here's just a close-up of that mid-run. You can see the little wings. It's starting to get some darker colors. It'll be soon getting feathers. And probably here it's chasing some sort of bug or small crab on the beach. And here's one here. This is a really young chick. You can tell because it's so downy, but Wilson's plovers have a heavier build than most plovers. So they like to eat crabs. On Marco, they eat a lot of fiddler crabs. And you can see this bird right here, a chick, and already, keyed in on crabs. The parents have showed it where to go. And it's moving in. This really tiny crab is not going to have a good day after this Wilson's plover gets done with it. But this is what they're doing every day, is they're out there learning how to find food, feed themselves, and so they're prepared for when they do get their flight feathers. A little bit bigger, the next stage, if you want to call it that. This is not a scientific term, stage, but this is just what I'm going to use for this presentation. This bird, you can see just starting to get feathers here in the wing, still very, very downy, not anywhere near where it's going to be able to fly, but you can tell it's growing well. It's getting a little bit bigger body. Those feathers are starting to come in. Oh, sorry, I skipped that. And then maybe 10 days after this is when that bird will be fledged. For us, depending on what's going on the beach, about 28 days, and the Wilson's plover chicks can fly. And so they have about a 25-day incubation and then 25 days to fledge. So about 50 days, if everything goes well, that whole process from egg laying to fledging is about 50 days, which is really fast from an egg to a chick that can fly, which is really amazing how fast that is. And you need to be that quick on the beach because it's such a harsh place to live. And then going forward, the next two birds, it's a similar strategy. You don't want to be flightless on the beach for too long.
Adam, we have two more questions.
Sure.
One is from Amy. What happens to the daddy bird? Does it stick around? And the other question from Alice is, what is the lifespan of these birds?
Okay, that's a good question. So the dad bird, the birds are, the dad bird is very involved with Wilson's plovers in raising the chicks. It does a lot of that. So a lot of times when you see those chicks, they're with the male. So it's involved in the whole timeline now obviously he's not part of the egg laying process, but as soon as those eggs are laid, he's involved in everything until these birds fledge. And even after they fledge, I do see the little family groups together on Marco right now. And I don't know what the record would be for the oldest known Wilson's plover. There might be people on this call actually that do know that. And if anybody does, they can chime in the chat box. I know people ban them, so that's how you would tell. And I'm not sure what the oldest banding record is, but I do think that if you have an 8 or 9 year old, 10-year-old plover, it's a pretty old bird, which is much different than the birds we're going to talk about next. I think they can live longer than that, but I don't think that they do often live longer than that. I would think the average age for a plover would be 7 or 8 years old, would be fairly old bird. And the next bird, this is the next one that we have nesting. This nests at the end of April. This is a colonial nester. So these are nesting in big groups. This is a lease tern. These birds arrive back in Florida. They go far south in the winter, like a lot of birds do, where the Wilson's plovers are here year round. We have them on the beaches year round. This bird leaves and gets back sometime towards the end of March. You'll start seeing them. They're not in the breeding colonies in March, but they arrive and they slowly trickle in from the end of March until getting near the end of April when they actually start to nest on the beach. So again, this is a least tern, the smallest tern. It nests in colonies. Well, I want to say huge colonies. It probably at one time it nested in huge colonies. Now we usually get 300 or 400 at a time. This is the bird when you hear about rooftop nesting in Florida. A lot of our birds, more than 50% of these birds now nest on rooftops because the available beach habitat has been taken up by people and buildings and things like that. So I guess, unfortunately, even though it's good that we have rooftops, I think someone like me would rather see them nesting on the beach where we can more easily protect them. But I'm going to talk about the beach nesting least terns. And here's an example of an adult least tern in breeding plumage with that yellow bill. And you know, here in Southwest Florida, if you see a small tern on the beach, black cap, yellow bill, that it's going to be a least tern. Very, very, very unlikely to be anything else.
Adam, we have a phone a friend from Andrew. He says, according to Google, the oldest banded Wilson plover male was at least 6 years old.
How old?
6 years.
Okay. Yeah, so that sounds about right to me. It's just such a harsh environment that it doesn't lend itself well to being very, very long lived. Here's so this is what we see on the beaches in the end of April. When these guys start to form their breeding colony, they pair up, and this is probably, you can't tell for sure because they look the same, a male and a female least tern. And the male will bring fish back to the female and prance around with it and trying to get her to accept it, and kind of forming that pair bond and to get her on board with him being her mate for the season. And a lot of times through other tern species that I've banded, I would see the same pairs of birds pairing year after year, especially once they had successful seasons. So they knew they could raise chicks successfully with their mate. So they continued to do it. Here he is again, just kind of still trying to get her to take that fish. And then when she takes that fish, a lot of times, and really this is the end game, is he's trying to copulate with her so they can start this nesting process. So this is this whole ritual that they do where it's offering fish and parading around the female, and then finally this will happen and pairing will happen. And this is, you see a lot of this the end of April and early May around here, or hopefully you do. If we're going to have a successful breeding season, this is the first step that needs to occur. And here's what a least tern nest looks like. Now these will be all over the sand in a least tern colony. So again, like this is even more, it amplifies this disturbance of people even more. And this is why when you're out on the beaches, where no matter where it is, it doesn't need to be in Florida, anywhere where there's least terns or any sort of colonial beach nesting bird, you often see a fence with stakes and string and signage letting you know that inside of this area is a colony of birds. And you can tell, you see this nest, and if you were walking, these eggs are small. They're about this, pretty close to the size of those Wilson's plover eggs. And they blend in perfectly with the sand, and they don't usually nest with vegetation. So it's a wide open beach. And with the shells and things like that on a lot of these beaches in Southwest Florida, these are really, really hard to see. They're hard to see for a trained eye, never mind someone that just doesn't have that search image in their brain. It's almost impossible. So that is why that we rope off these areas, just so people, they know they're there, they walk around them, and usually that's enough. And again, I would say, and these birds with that active defense, that you'll know when you're too close to a least tern colony. And I'll show you a little bit more about what I mean. So here, just to give it a little bit of scale and to see how hard this is to see, this is a least tern standing over the nest. You can just see at the bottom there, these two eggs right here, and they're just barely sticking up above the shells and sand. So really this least terns is just not a big scrape in the sand, and just enough to get those eggs in. So it's so hard to see, as you can tell by this picture. And if you were walking down the beach and you didn't know it was there, you would never see it.
And how big are those eggs, Adam?
I don't know how to, trying to think of something to describe.
They remind me, I'm not a biologist, this might not be right, but of delicious, I think they're called robin eggs that you get at Easter time that are like Cadbury brand, and they have milk on the inside. That's what they remind me of.
And I would say maybe, I don't know why I don't have a good descriptor for this. Like a jumbo grape that you would get at the store, some of those like freakishly large grapes, but like something about like that big. I mean, really small. I mean, a third the size of a ping pong ball even. I mean, or even smaller. I don't know. I'm gonna have to like, now I can't even think of what the dimensions would be. 1.5 inches long. I mean, not big at all. So they blend in really, like they just look like all the other little shells on the beach.
And someone else is wondering what time of day you might see these birds.
So when these birds are nesting, so right now out on Marco, which primarily our major colonies, Big Marco Pass Critical Wildlife Area, there's a handful of least terns that are nesting. We don't have a large colony there, but any time of day you could see them when it's nesting season. I mean, they're there all the time because they have eggs and chicks on the beach. So I would, any time during the day from late April, you know, through the end of June, typically for a least tern colony, you'll see them. So you can go anytime. And usually the areas that they're nesting are protected with these fences. So you'll know where they are, and you also know where not to go. And then also be just mindful of where you're walking and pay attention to what the bird's telling you. So this, I'm gonna play a video right now. It's pretty loud.
Right
So
before you play it, Adam, can I interrupt you? This is really cool. So the bird biologist at Rookery Bay, Cole, actually has some eggs that she wants to show us. So what I'm going to do is actually share her camera. So in order to do so, I'm going to have to spotlight Adam. So cancel that. And then I'm going to bring Cole into the, here we go. Okay, and Cole, I think if you say something, your screen will pop up.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Cole. Yeah.
So this is actually not a real egg. It's made to the dimensions of a Wilson's plover egg. So if you guys can see that, that's about the size that a Wilson's plover egg is.
How cool is that? Talk about having good resources in the audience. Thank you. I feel like if it was in person like it used to be, you would have just raised your hand and brought them to the front of the room. So I'm glad we were able to make the technology work for that. So super awesome. Thank you, Cole. I'll go ahead and hide your camera, bring Adam back. And Adam, I wanted to ask you one more question before you get to your video. And that is, do they sit on the eggs almost constantly or no?
Yes, almost constantly. You know, you will see them certain times of the day. A lot of times, like skimmers or least terns in the morning when it's still not that hot and it's obviously it's not cold. They'll be standing around, you know, not necessarily sitting on it. And then sometimes when it's really hot out in the afternoon, you'll notice the bird standing by the nest and kind of its wings a little bit spread and it's shading it because it's so hot out. So but they're always around. Typically they don't desert the eggs or the colony for no good reason. There are times when you'll have a great horned owl coming at night or something like that, where then the adult terns will abandon all night long and come back during the day. But typically they want to be around or sitting most of the time, constantly for least terns, I would say about 3 weeks. It takes about 21 days for a least tern nest to hatch. And here I'm going to show you, so this is not least terns, this is common terns, which happen to be the craziest terns when you get too close to where they nest. They're insane. This is a loud video, but this is what I'm talking about when I say mobbing. So if you happen to be near a common tern colony and you got too close, this is what would be happening, and to a lesser degree with least terns. There's a little pause in the middle of the video, but then we'll pick back up again. So that's a common tern colony in the Gulf of Maine, but that's what happens when you're out in that colony doing research. Constantly, those terns are bouncing off your head they'll actually make contact you with their bill. A lot of times I've been in those colonies and bleeding when I come out because they get that bill up under your hat or something like that. So they're really good at driving out, and most predators don't want to deal with something like that. And the least terns do something similar, but they're not really making contact with you. They defecate all over you though. So, you know, if there'd be poop raining out of the sky on you and birds going crazy. So if that's happening, you're definitely too close to something and you need to back up. And even I would say areas that we have posted, we can only put the posting sometimes so far from the colony because we're limited by the space that we have because of the ocean or something like that. So there's a possibility that you're too close to that colony, even if you're outside the rope. So what we would ask people is, if that is happening and you're not inside the colony and you're not apparently doing anything wrong, but you might be a little too close for the bird. So if that's happening, just move a little bit and you'll notice that as soon as you're far enough away, they won't even care that you're there. But when you're too close, they definitely care, as you can see by that video there. So here, again, this is just the least tern. You can see the egg poking out again, how hard it is to see. And then after about 21 days, this happens. This is always everybody's favorite thing because least tern chicks are just so cute. Little blonde, tiny birds. So these birds, when they hatch and they dry, they're semi-precocial. So where the plovers and a lot of shorebirds are precocial, meaning that they're up on their feet, they're running around, they're feeding themselves. These guys are semi-precocial, which means they're up and they're moving around too. Not quite as much, I would say, in the first couple days as a plover would be, but they don't really need to. They rely on the parents for everything, for defense, obviously. Just like the Wilson's plover, they're very susceptible to the heat. They can't thermoregulate until they're older and have feathers. They got to be covered up when it's raining. All the same things as the solitary nesters, but also for food. So these birds are fish eaters. So terns plunge dive to catch fish. So obviously, if you can't fly and you're brand new to the world, you can't feed yourself. So you're relying on the adult. So this is really important that they're not being disturbed, even more so because they won't even be eating. If the adults are too worried about a disturbance, they're not out trying to catch food for the chicks. And also it's really important that our nearshore waters are healthy, where we have really good supplies of, you know, bait fish or just small fish, forage fish, pelagic juveniles of certain species, whatever the case may be. High quality forage is really important. So it's really important to keep the coastal waters clean, which of course is another thing that everybody down here, all conservation organizations are all kind of on that same page. Keeping that water clean is so important to lots of different things here in Southwest Florida, the birds, the economy, everything. So that's another really important link in this breeding cycle of the least tern, is that high quality forage and really clean water. So here, you know, it's a chick getting a little bit older. You can see obviously that it's being fed by the adult. And this, if you go to an active least tern colony, you can watch this happen all day long. They're feeding them constantly. These birds, you can imagine how much you have to eat to go from an egg to a flight capable bird, or from a hatchling to a flight capable bird in 21 days. It's a really, really fast process. It's 3 weeks and these birds can fly. So they need to eat a lot. It needs to have high caloric value, and they need to be undisturbed. And you can see this bird's getting, you can see the feathers kind of coming in, still real fuzzy, not near flying yet, but growing and starting to get those feathers. These two are about the same age, maybe a little bit older than that last one. You're getting a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit more feathers, but still lots and lots of down on these birds. And here's one, just next, getting a little bit bigger even. You can see that wing now poking out, starting to get those wing feathers. The feathers are coming in on the head. The back of the bird is starting to get feathers. Not much of a tail yet, but you can see that little tail poking out of the fuzz. This bird is getting closer, and you know, everything starts to happen pretty rapidly once they start to hit this stage here. And here's a couple pictures of fledgling least tern. So this is, you know, this bird with the adult in the lower left is probably, it's just about fledged, probably about 21 days old or so. And then that bird on the right is like practicing fishing. So these birds, they do get fed by the adults once they fledge. So once the birds can fly, they're not self-reliant yet. And different things that I've read, it takes a while to master this, because they have to, in their brain somehow, look down at the water and make a calculation based on the color and turbidity of the water, the surface action of the water and how deep that fish is. So they have to practice, and it takes them a while. Like I've read things with the larger tern species that maybe it takes 2 years before it's really, really mastered. So for a while afterwards and during migration, these chicks rely on the adults. So they need them around. That's why these kind of birds are tough to rehab as chicks, because you can't keep them for long and then release them, because they don't really have the tools necessary to survive a migration on their own, or even to catch enough food to eat if they're not migrating. So this is a fledged bird still with the adult. They'll move off their breeding colonies to places, staging areas where they're kind of just staging, resting, and feeding as they're beginning their migration south. And the adults will be with the chicks, and they'll be feeding them. And lots of birds do this, and you can watch this. If you happen to see staging areas, you can see adults flying in. You can see chicks begging. If you go to the beach now, we're getting hatchie or royal terns. They nest around the Tampa Bay area, and then a lot further north up the east coast of the United States. But they're arriving here now. These fledgling birds, you'll notice that they're a little bit brown. They look like young birds, and you just have to listen, and they're constantly begging. So they're not near their breeding territory or their colony, but they're begging from the adults, and the adults are continuing to feed them as they're moving. So the third, this is the final bird. This bird nests a little bit later. This is the black skimmer. So the black skimmers here start their breeding activity about mid-May on the beaches here. They're around. We do have skimmers here all year round. Southwest Florida is a really important place for skimmers. From band resighting and banding records from banding projects that we're doing, we know that lots of skimmers from a lot of different colonies all the way up through Massachusetts spend the winter down here in Southwest Florida. So it's a really, really important place for skimmers, and obviously it's important for breeding skimmers as well. We have large colonies at Carlos Point and Fort Myers, and also on Marco, currently raising chicks now. So this is a bird, if you go out now, you can see the chicks. We had a little trouble in the colonies from Tropical Storm Cristobal. So a lot of nests were washed out, but these birds are really tough and they're resilient and they're not deterred easily. So most of them re-nested. So we have a lot of chicks of varying size at the colony on Marco right now. And this whole thing starts about mid-May, the end of May, probably is about peak nesting for these birds. You guys all probably know this bird, very distinctive bird with that lower mandible longer than the upper mandible, and it's used for feeding, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So here's a picture of a few of them in a group with some gulls and a royal tern here on the far left side, kind of photobombing this. And I don't know for sure because these birds look similar, obviously, but there is sexual dimorphism in these birds. So the males typically bigger than the females. So in this photo, you can see that bird in the middle. That maybe I would say is a male bird if I had to guess, maybe female bird to the right of him right there. And you can see the difference in size. These birds could be the same age. There's just a difference in size between the males and the females. And here's how the skimmer gets its name. This is how it uses that lower mandible. They skim the surface of the water. So unlike a tern that plunge dives, this bird is skimming the surface. And when it feels a fish, snaps its bill closed, its head snaps back. And then it either can swallow it on the wing, or a lot of times now it's carrying it back to the colony to feed these chicks that are just eating and eating and eating. And something interesting about a black skimmer is you can see this picture. I know I blew it up and it's kind of fuzzy, but you can see that pupil that's just a slit in the sun. So it's the only bird species in the world that has this adaptation. And this is because this bird's pupil gets really, really large at night. So it lets a lot of light in. Black skimmers feed a lot at night. The surface of the water is calmer. The fish, these young fish, they come closer to the surface at night. So it makes sense that a black skimmer will feed at night. And with trail cam photos or just being on the beach, we see these birds are feeding those chicks all night long. They're bringing in forage fish for the chicks, and this helps them do that. So this pupil can get very, very large. But the problem with that is that during the day, while that helps you at night, during the day it's a detriment because the UV radiation can really damage an eye. So this bird has an adaptation to shrink that down, which reduces the glare and that it would get if it didn't have this. So this is an adaptation to keep their eye safe in bright light and also allow them to feed at night. And here's some courtship flights. This is the black skimmers are doing this in the beginning while they're choosing their mate, kind of like the least terns are doing the same thing. And a lot of times what these birds are doing in these past flights is that freshly molted feathers glow pretty bright in the ultraviolet spectrum. And these birds can see in that spectrum. And I suppose if you, if your potential mate is looking at you flying around and you're not glowing because you have nice new feathers, that maybe you're just not, you're not fit enough. You're not the right mate. You're a little bit out of shape maybe, or you're not feeling well, so you don't want to have chicks with that bird. So hopefully if it all goes well and your feathers are new and you're strong, that this will help in the selection process. And they're both doing that to each other. And then here is a male offering a female a fish. You can see the bird on the right is larger than that bird on the left. And this is kind of the courtship ritual, the same as the least terns, pretty much the same. Same result. The female takes the fish, accepts the male, there's copulation, and then shortly thereafter, there'll be egg laying in the colony. So when I start to walk the beaches and I watch these birds, when I start seeing this happening frequently, I know that eggs are coming soon. So you can anticipate, it's not a complete surprise when there's eggs in a colony. You're watching these birds, you're watching the behavior, so you can sort of get the timing down. And then again, like the Wilsons or the least tern, they're gonna dig a scrape in the sand. This one's a little bit more substantial, a little deeper, a little bigger. It's a bigger bird with bigger eggs, chicken-sized eggs, something like that, or more or less. And here's what the nest looks like. This is one that has, obviously still has an egg in it, and then 2 brand new chicks, just like the least tern. These birds, once they dry, they're mobile, but obviously they can't feed themselves, and they rely on the adult for all the same things that the least tern chicks do. They're also fish eaters, so they can't feed themselves. So the adults have to provide everything for these birds. You might even see this when they're hatching. There's a really freshly hatched skimmer chick. I mean, and then the adult will pick up the eggshells. And this is common with a lot of beach nesting birds. They pick up the eggshells and carry them away so they're not laying around in the colony where an odor might attract predators. So this is just another strategy to keep from being detected. And this bird is brand new. This is about as small a skimmer chick as you'll see. And again, this is interesting too, where this doesn't happen as much with terns or at all, but this bird is doing that feigning. So it also, they do dive bomb you a little bit, and skimmers do, and a lot of them do this. So this is, they're doing that broken wing display to try to move you away from the eggs of the chick, similar to plovers and other shorebirds.
And what predators do they have besides people on the beach?
So the colonies here, typically what we have is raccoons in some places, fish crows are a problem. And those are the main ones that we have. But really, any of these beach nesting birds, anything that will eat an egg is a problem somewhere in some colony. I mean, coyotes, raccoons, fish crows, multiple different birds of prey, owls at night and hawks and things during the day. Mink, if you're working in the North Atlantic where I worked, I mean, anything, almost everything eats eggs because of the high nutritional value. So almost anything like that is a predator. Even your dog, if it's not on a leash, or feral cats, or a cat that's let outside, if it's near one of these colonies, can be a devastating thing. Herons will eat chicks and eggs. Black-crowned night herons, in my experience, are the worst colony predators as far as those herons go, but any of them, a great blue heron, anything like that would be in there and happy to eat young chicks like this skimmer that's poking out from the wing. So here is just an example of what these chicks need. So a lot of the time, one adult is out foraging. The chick is with this other adult, and it's probably hot, and they're tucked under the wing to keep it shaded and cool, and to keep it safe. And then they'll come running out from underneath the parent when the adult comes back with a fish. Here's a couple pretty young ones, pretty fuzzy, and probably they're either panting because they're hot or they're begging and making noise, which they're doing constantly begging for food. They want to eat all the time. And here's an adult that came back. You can see how small these chicks are and how big that fish is that they're going to eat. And they do, they can get that down. And fish like that are just a really good meal, and it helps these birds. Obviously, they have to go from being that tiny to the same size. When they fledge, they're exactly the same size as that adult bird. They're just a little bit different color. So that's a huge amount of growth in such a short period of time, which really is, it's amazing that they can even do that. And they require food like this. So just like any of these other birds, really undisturbed feeding is what's needed. And it's happening round the clock in a black skimmer colony, really 24 hours a day. Sometimes maybe not when it's really hot in the middle of the day, but the rest of the day they're out foraging and feeding their chicks. And here's the chicks chasing an adult. I've watched what I think is pretty funny. I think these adults sometimes get annoyed by these birds because I've watched a scene like this where the chicks are chasing around the adult with a fish for several minutes, and then the adult just eats it itself and doesn't even give it to the chicks because they have to eat too. So I think that's pretty funny. And I just, in my brain, of course, this is not what's happening for real, but I just think they get annoyed at the constant begging. So they decide to tease them a little bit and not share the food. And if things are going really well, which we are really fortunate here at the colonies in Southwest Florida, which is not the case in every beach nesting bird colony, but our birds have really good access to really high quality forage. And this chick right here, this is what you hope to see. This chick it's not really old, but it's round and fat. And this bird has been eating really well. So this is really a sign that the colony, or at least this bird is doing well. It's probably not very disturbed. There's probably not a lot of predators harassing it. And there's a lot of really good high quality fish close by. I mean, this is what I like to see when I'm on the beach, just a little butterball of a black skimmer chick. And here's a good view of that type of chick and what we get here most years. This bird is just round. I mean, this bird looks like it's eating constantly. You can sort of see how the wing is starting to come in there and you're starting to get those feathers. It's starting to become more defined. And this bird just looks like a little softball with a head. And I just like this picture because you can see down this bird's throat, but this is just what they're doing all the time. They could have just eaten and they want to eat again and they're just yelling about it.
How many fish do you think they eat in one day when they're that size?
So I don't know. I've been on projects where we did provisioning studies before. So one example I think that I could use where a common tern colony in Maine that had really good, not that this is the same, that had a really good close by forage fish supply. When I'd be sitting in a blind doing a feeding study, so I'm watching the adult birds from certain pairs bring back and what they're feeding each individual chick, and all these birds are marked so you can tell them apart. In a 3-hour blind stint, it was hundreds of feedings. Other islands that where the forage fish is poor, there'd be 20 in an hour or so, and we would have, you know, hundreds of feeding. So I would say these chicks, I mean, they're eating hundreds of fish a day. These broods, these individual broods, and it depends on the size, but it's constant. And when it's close by, it's really, these skimmers can go into the Marco Lagoon and skim, grab a fish, and they're back at the colony. So they're not gone long. The foraging trips are short and they're frequent. So I would say, I don't know, they're eating 30 fish. I mean, and I've watched a little bit. So 30 fish in an hour when it's good. I've watched some black skimmers do that here. And this chick, you can now really losing the down. I think this is a hysterical pose. I don't know what this bird is doing. It almost looks like a bird dog. That's all I can think about when I see it. But you can see the wing really growing in, the tail's starting to come in. It can't fly yet, but it's getting bigger. This bird's probably approaching 20 days old. And then here's a fledgling. So at the end of this, what we hope to see is this happening, where you see these fledgling birds practicing skimming on their own. And this bird, you know, fully grown, you can see it, but not too long after fledging. This might be about 3 weeks after it can fledge. So this bird maybe is like 45, 46 days old, something like that, which is really amazing that it can do this 45 days after it hatches. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is something else that we're doing with these birds, which is more than just observation. I have a black skimmer banding project that I started in 2017, which kind of piggybacks off a project that Dr. Marianne Carosi and Dr. Elizabeth Fories have been doing in Pinellas County. That's Audubon, Florida, and Eckerd College. And then I kind of have a project that's piggybacking off of that. Of course, all the data is pooled. And obviously, we all chat about it all the time. So it's really one big project, different people doing different components. I'm hoping soon that I can add the Florida Panhandle to this so we can have more of a meta-population study, so we can look at the birds across this Gulf region in Florida. So we go out at night. This project, we go out at night. I can ban birds about 20 days old. So they have to be about 20 days to accommodate the bands that I use. So we go out at night. We use headlamps and big butterfly nets, and we literally chase down these large chicks because they're fast. We catch them, and then we put leg bands on them. So I use a field readable band. As you can see here, that green band, you can read that from a distance. So then you never have to recatch that bird. You can just read it and you know which individual it is. So this bird is a fledgling, just about a fledgling. And you can see that metal band. The second band I use is a metal band on the lower left leg, which is kind of like, it's a federal metal band. It's kind of like the bird's social security number. So even if that bigger band fell off, you can sometimes read that metal band. If not, if you retrap that bird for a project you were doing later or something like that, or to reband it, you would know which bird that was. That's also an individual mark. So this is E09. This is the only green E09 skimmer that's out there. And then also that individual metal band, that's also individual to that bird. It's unique to that bird. It means like that's that bird. And that bird's name to me is E09. I don't give them any more names than that, just the band. So something interesting, and why these banding projects are so important, I think, are one of the reasons, is that sometimes it lets you see things that you wouldn't see with the naked eye. So this is just an example of one of the things that I've run into just since 2017. So the birds I banded here are all plotted on this graph. The 2017 birds have blue, are the blue dots. And you can see the wing measurement across the x-axis, the weight up the y, and you can see the weight of the bird compared to the wing length. And you can see that the blue dots, those birds are much heavier in general than the orange dots, which are 2018 birds. Looking at those colonies both years from outside that fence, it looked the same. It didn't look like anything different was happening. There was a lot of chicks running around both years. You couldn't really tell the difference. They seemed to be growing okay. And then once I started banding in 2018, I noticed that the chicks were very skinny. And that year, as you can remember, people really can't forget, that was like the lost summer in Florida where we had that really horrible red tide. At the time of banding, the red tide wasn't that bad on Marco. We weren't seeing the piles of dead fish or anything like that, but then these birds were showing something pretty interesting. The fact that they were losing weight. A few of them I caught several times that I had banded, and they kept losing weight. And then unfortunately, I found a few of them dead. Not many of them died though, but I saw a few dead. So we brought those in and they did necropsies and analyzed those birds. And they found moderate levels of brevetoxin in the tissues, all tissues sampled in these birds, and also really high levels of coccidiosis, which is a parasite. And it's a parasite that's in these birds. But if you have a comorbidity or a stressor, in this case, probably, we don't know for sure, that brevetoxin from red tide, it caused that bacteria, that parasite to really explode. And that can cause the birds to even become anorexic where they don't want to eat. And this is what was happening in this colony. A lot of the birds that I banded were really underweight. I mean, 100 grams under what they would normally be. I'd say the average bird I catch and band is probably 290 grams, something like that, and a healthy bird of the age that I catch them. And a lot of these birds were under 200. So it was a problem. And when you fledge and you're really underweight, I mean, you have less of a chance to survive. I mean, you're just not as fit, and you really need to be strong and fit when you fledge in order to just survive that first winter. And to help solidify my thoughts on that, I've seen a lot of these birds since I banded them. I do see some, so they all didn't die, and some of them that I thought for sure would, because of how poor condition they seem to be in, I've seen them recently. So they did survive. And I don't know why that is, because a lot of them I would suspect didn't survive. So this is something that's really important, where if you're just observing from a distance, you're not necessarily seeing this problem. And then this kind of thing, if it happens year after year after year, can sneak up on you, and you can have big population crashes if you don't know it's happening, or at least the crash will surprise you. There's not much you can do necessarily to fix it, but you're aware of a problem that you might be able to fix. I'm happy to say that I'm not seeing this. I didn't see this in 2019 again. And I didn't see it, I'm not seeing it this year while I'm banding birds. So that was this snapshot of 2018, but it was good to know, but it's not continuing. That's not a trend that's continuing, which is very, very good to see. And another thing that I think is pretty cool about these birds, and something that I didn't expect that we're starting to see at least more now, is where these birds go to breed, and from based on where they were hatched. So I would have expected that these birds would return to their natal colony to breed when it was time. These birds breed typically at 3 years old. They can breed at 2, but mostly 3. So my 2017 birds, this is their first year. So the first year I banded, this is the first year those chicks will be breeding, I would say, in mass. So what we're seeing is some of them back in the Marco colony breeding, raising chicks. But then we saw this bird. So this is C53. This is a picture from 2017, shortly after the bird was banded in the colony on Marco 3 years ago. And then just a couple of days ago, this is C53 again. And this is on Carlos Point, Fort Myers Beach. So not the natal colony, but this bird now is raising chicks of its own, which is really cool to see for me as the bander. This makes me happy to see, like, this is kind of why we're doing it. And we're hoping that we're seeing that these birds are living. So this is really good. Not only did this bird survive, this bird is raising chicks of its own. So that's really a big deal. Once a bird reaches breeding age, it's a very, very important bird to have in the population. What's also interesting is that it moved to Carlos Point. There's also birds that Beth Forries and my colleagues, Holly Short and others, are seeing in Pinellas around Tampa and St. Pete, Clearwater. They're seeing some of my birds breeding there. And in turn, I'm seeing some of Beth's birds breeding on Marco, and also some of Beth's birds are breeding in Fort Myers Beach. So it's really interesting, not what I would have thought. When I was talking with Beth, not what she would have expected either, that much movement. So that tells us that there's not a super high natal site fidelity, and also that all of these areas, and we can't be looking at it as a colony to colony basis. We need to be looking at it as on a regional scale, because all of these colonies seem to be source colonies for other breeding colonies. And then these birds are moving in between them to breed, which is really interesting. And also, I would imagine that helps mix up that gene pool, which is also really important for any wild population. So it's really interesting. Of course, we need more data, but we're seeing a lot of movement. And I think that's really encouraging, that all of these colonies are producing birds that are heading to other colonies, and also very interesting that they're actually doing that kind of movement where we wouldn't really have expected it before this banding project started. So that's pretty exciting to see, really good to see these birds getting older and breeding. It means that we're doing okay here. I mean, we have to stay vigilant as far as our shorebird protection and seabird protection, but the things that we're doing seem to be working. And we're also always tweaking it to make it better when we notice things that are not happening the way we want them to. So just quickly, I mean, I don't have to tell most of you this, but things you can do to help. Like I said, don't go in the posted areas, and the bird behavior is a really big deal. And don't feed gulls and crows on the beach. Don't leave trash, which is something that I'm sure no one here does anyway. Leave your dog at home or on a leash. And then most importantly, volunteer for a local beach stewarding group. I would suggest the one in Southwest Florida that I happen to be in charge of, but anyone near you, or if you want to move just to join mine, that's okay too. We always need people. This summer, we're not doing much of that, but I would imagine next summer will be a different summer and a better summer. We'll all be able to move around, and you'll be able to join any group that you'd like. And now, I'm probably sure I ran over. I'll take questions. I did run over.
You did run over, Adam, but it's so interesting. And we have so many questions in the chat box. So Adam, if you wouldn't mind canceling your share, what I would love everyone to do is to click the button in the upper right where it says gallery view. When you click gallery view, you'll be able to see everyone that's on the call. And that way, as we ask questions, you'll hopefully be able to see their face if their camera is on. So feel free to turn on your cameras and stay muted while we go through the questions, unless we're addressing you directly. So I have a lot of questions in the chat box, but I wanted to give an opportunity to let anyone go that has a 10:30 appointment, but not without promoting Adam's next lecture. So you saw already we have Breakfast with the Birds on August 17th. But we have another special opportunity that's really cool. We are offering a series of lectures called Science Solutions that are featuring success stories of partnerships within the reserve. And Adam just so happens to be our keynote speaker for August 6th. So what I'm going to do is put in the chat box the link where you can find out more. And hopefully you'll join us there. That is a free lecture, and it takes place at 1 o'clock on August 6th. And this seems like a perfect audience to join and share the word. I want to turn it over to my colleague Morgan, who is going to invite you to something that happens even sooner, and then we'll circle back to all the questions. So feel free to stay as long as you can. Morgan?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you, Adam. That was a great talk. We always love hearing you. And we're going to recruit you yet again. So we've been doing a really cool event through the whole month of July called Fly Through July. It's kind of geared towards kids, but we found that the adult crowd really is getting into it. We're doing naturalist talks on Fridays, which, again, Adam will be joining us. I'll be giving the presentation, but Adam's going to be my right-hand man, giving me some tips and tricks. But yeah, so we've got story times going up on our Facebook. And if you haven't followed the Friends group, I definitely implore you. We have a lot of great content going up. We do weekly posts about, like I said, our story times and a bunch of other cool stuff too, keeping you in the loop. So if you haven't checked it out, please do. Fly Through July will be going on until the very end on the 31st. So check us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Morgan. Okay, Adam, I'm going to go through these questions. Several people have asked where the least tern colonies are nesting this year, and someone even put in an answer as to Palm and Stump Pass. But go ahead and elaborate on that, because I know a lot of people want to know, where are the least terns?
So in Collier County, like I said, there's a handful on Marco, but I wouldn't call it a colony. Second Chance Critical Wildlife Area, which is south of the Dome Homes. It's in Rookery Bay managed lands. Rookery Bay collected a lot of data for a long, long time to finally convince everyone else that it needed to be a critical wildlife area. So it can only be viewed by boat. It's closed to public access now. So if you did have a boat and you wanted to go out there, you could see least terns there now currently. You just don't go on it. And if you do, T-Motion will be there to yell at you. So we patrol it pretty heavily, and you can't really, can't get away with walking out there. But you can go by boat. Or Carlos Point seems to be another one. It's at Fort Myers Beach. It's the very south end of Fort Myers Beach. So there's a big wide open beach there. Right now, most of those least terns are done nesting. So they're still there, and they have fledglings, but this is late in the season for least terns. Typically, least terns are fledging, I would say most of them by the 4th of July. And by August, into August, we don't even have least terns here anymore. They're starting to move South America and that direction.
Cool. Okay, another question that I thought was really interesting is from Venice Audubon. And it says, I saw a great blue heron standing in the middle of the least terns at Stump Pass. Was he eating the chicks? It seems like he could wipe out the whole colony over a few weeks.
So I guess I don't know if he was eating the chicks. I would think that if he's standing there and saw one, he would definitely eat it. I mean, that is a prey item for these large herons for sure. And my guess would be that's what he was doing in there, because I don't think he would just stand there, because it's so much harassment from the least terns. And yeah, they can cause a lot of trouble. And they can also, because they feed at night as well, just like a black-crowned night heron, they can be in colonies at night. You don't typically see them at night, but I have seen great blue herons in bird colonies at night. So I would say that colony could suffer some pretty severe damage from a great blue heron. Cool,
thank you so much. Going back to those replica eggs that we saw, thank you, Cole, for demonstrating. Someone has a question, where can they buy those sorts of things? Is there an online resource that sells shore and wading bird egg reproductions?
So I'm not sure if there is. I don't know. I know that the eggs, well, I have some of those too, but they're in the office where I don't go anymore. They, a colleague of mine at Rookery Bay a few years ago made them, Allie Smith. So she went to Michael's and bought little wooden eggs, and she painted them like least tern eggs. But I'm not sure if there's I want to say, to fool these birds, sometimes we used to pull the eggs out of a nest to ban the adults. And sometimes I would use small rocks with black Sharpie spots and put those in there. And I'd hate to say this, but it's true. Those birds would sit on those. So for my purposes, I never really needed to fool them that much, because they were pretty easy to fool. But I bet a Google search, you could find something like that.
One thing you could do if you want them, like this one is made out of clay. And what I did to make this one, and yeah, I have a bunch of alleys. But this one, there's this book called The Egg Book, I think is what it's called. And it's got 600 different species of eggs in it, all pictured to size. And if you're interested in making them, just get some clay, get the book, and kind of make them to the right size. They're really good for educational purposes.
And if there's anybody out there that is looking to start a new business, this is a niche that we would definitely love to know about. So keep us posted if you're in the market for making some fake eggs. Adam, there's another question. Is there a time of day that would be best for finding these birds to be able to see them?
I would always, I would always suggest as early in the morning as you can go, because if by any chance there is any disturbance, the temperatures are cooler. So that would be, and it's better for photography. It's better all around. And they're more active those times of day as well. So it's more interesting to watch them in the morning or in the evening because it's not 7,000 degrees, or at least that's what it feels like to me when I'm on the beach. So it's better, I would say, to go in the morning. There'll be a lot of feeding. The chicks are going to be moving around. If you just sit still somewhere far enough away, the birds will be, you'll be able to watch them all morning long.
And the last question in the chat box is, what are the dangers of fishing line to the birds that you talked about?
So I would say just what you know about dangers of fishing line in general. So if you ever see it when you're walking down the beach, pick it up. I mean, that's what I would suggest. And it can tangle the birds. These least terns, you know, they can eat fish off a hook, just like you see the pelicans do, or the larger terns. I mean, entangle their legs, hook themselves, get wrapped around their wings, get tangled on chicks on the beach, all sorts of different things. It's trash. So if you have it, or you're fishing and you have a big tangle in your line and you cut it, take it with you or put it in one of those fishing line receptacles. I just think the line in the environment is just so bad in general. I mean, it'll get, and then wading birds, as we know, sometimes they carry it back to the colony and they use it as nesting material, and then the chicks are caught in it or the other adults get caught in it. It's just bad. It's just bad for everything, but it can wrap around their legs and tangle their wings. I would say that's the most common thing that we see.
Great. Well, thank you, Adam, so much. If anyone would like to put on their camera and give us a wave from your living room or your office or wherever you are, it's always fun to see everybody on the screen. And once everybody has that on, it is in the lower left corner. Just click the button that says Start Video. And if you want to grab your coffee cup, and we'll give a cheers to Adam. If you'd like to put yourself off of mute, you can click the button there at the bottom, because it's always so hard for the speaker when they cannot hear the applause. We know,
Oh boy,
job, but he can't hear us. So we're gonna try something new. And so if everyone takes their microphone off of mute, and then on the count of 3, we will, I guess, either cheers or clap, because you can't really do both at the same time. So if you guys think Adam did a great job, let's hear it.
Yay! Good job.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining in this crazy time. We had these dates booked, advertised, and then the pandemic happened. So thank you for bearing with us and being flexible. And I think in a way it's kind of a silver lining, because we're able to reach people that are further away from the Environmental Learning Center than you probably would have driven to for the lecture. So there's no breakfast included. I know Panera Bread was a real hit, but hey, you can have whatever you want in the comfort of your home. And we really appreciate your donation to the Friends of Rookery Bay. That's really critical at this crazy, crazy time when there's not much income coming in. You know, our Environmental Learning Center is closed. We don't have admissions. We have so many programs canceled, including summer camp, which was really heartbreaking, not only for us, the educators, but also for the kids and the parents. So anything you can do to help would be greatly appreciated. The proceeds from this lecture are split to Audubon and the Friends of Rookery Bay. So you already received a thank you for attending with more information on how to donate right at 10:30 in your email box. So hopefully we'll see you again soon. And I just ask that you share what you learned with someone, and that'll be a good message for today. So good karma for everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and a virtual applause for Jean Hall, the photographer who provided those photos. So incredible.
Yeah.
I saw you out there, Jean. Thank you for your contribution.